Good morning, my friends. Today we are going to be continuing to learn the second chapter of the laws of idol worship. A very, very fundamental commandment, a very important basis and fundamental of Judaism. So we're going to be learning today in this chapter, we're going to be learning the laws of the fundamentals of what idol worship consists of and what we're not allowed to do. And then we're going to be discussing the laws of blaspheming, which is something which is a very terrible thing, and we will see how it all comes together over here. So join along, we're learning the laws of idol worship, Avodat Kochavim, chapter 2. So the Rambam begins by telling us that the essence of the commandment forbidding the worship of any false gods is not to serve any of the creations, not an angel, not a sphere or planet, not a star, or any of the fundamental elements of the world or any entity within them. And even if a person is going to say, well, I know that God is true, I know and I believe in God, but I also want to give honor and serve one of God's creations. So that is something which we're not allowed to do. We are not allowed, as the Torah says, lest you lift your eyes heavenward and see the sun and moon and the stars and bow down to them and worship them. These are only entities that God has appointed to be giving us light, but it's all coming from God Himself. And we're not to give them or serve them anything on their own accord, but rather it's all just from God. And that's the important fundamental that we have to realize over here. And therefore, we are not allowed to go after our hearts or follow our eyes and be strayed by them, so to speak, and so that we should not have any intermediary between us and our Creator. And that's basically the fundamental and the base core of not serving idols. We can't come and say that there is a certain creation which this will be a way that we're going to connect to God. Even if we're saying that there is a God at the other end, that's still something which we're not allowed to do. And the Rambam continues along these lines of the idea that we're not allowed to go and stray after our hearts or our eyes, which is what it says in the verse that we should not stray after our hearts and eyes. The Rambam says that there are many books and texts, literature, in regards to the idea of idol worship. From the very many gods and idols, there are many ways of serving them and many ideas and philosophies and so on. So God says that we're not allowed to involve ourselves in studying these ideas. We're not allowed to read about them. We're not allowed to involve our mind in them. As it says, do not turn to the idols. And as it says in Deuteronomy, it says, lest you seek to find out about their gods, saying, how did they serve them? So there is a clear prohibition in the Torah telling us that we're not allowed to go and search and learn how idol worship works. That's something which is very clear. Because what happens is a person starts reading about it, it starts interesting them, and then they continue reading more, and eventually it can pull them in to worshiping idols. And for the very simple reason, the general thrust over here is that we are not allowed to pull ourselves into the idea of idol worship. And essentially, if a person starts going after idol worship, he's going to be lessening his belief in God. Because we are mortal, simple people for the most part. And we cannot understand, not always do we comprehend the truth in its entirety. And our belief in God in itself needs to always be strengthened. And if a person is going to start rooting other beliefs and he's going to start involving himself in things that are not essential and helpful for the belief in God, so then one day he's going to say, well, today I believe in God. But then tomorrow he's going to read something else. He's going to say, well, I believe in this idol today. And essentially, he's going to be losing his belief in God. And at the end of it, it's all going to fall apart. So therefore the Torah says, do not go after your hearts and your eyes, which will lead you astray. And that's a very, very important, fundamental, which applies over here specifically in our context in regards to the idea of serving idols, but in truth, it actually applies to everything in our life. That always we should realize our mind tells us what is the right thing, and we should follow that and do the right thing. And sometimes our heart might feel otherwise, but we should know that it's only our heart feeling. And if our mind knows that this is the right thing to do, we should push away our heart and tell our heart, that's the wrong thing, and you should not be feeling this. Of course, we have to work with our heart, to want to make our heart to feel the right things. And as well with our eyes, the same thing, that we should always be focused on seeing proper things, positive things, and ultimately that will have an effect on us. Because everything that we see and everything that we hear and everything that our heart starts to feel, all has an effect on us. So the bottom line is that we want to be affected by good things. For instance, there's an idea that we don't eat non-kosher food, right? Similarly, it says, and this is something which the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke about, that a child should only play with kosher animals. Same way we only eat kosher animals, we should also play with kosher animals and be involved. And when you have a child growing up, so his toys or her toys should be kosher. So because of that has an effect on us. So, same idea. But over here it's obviously in a much stronger way. We're talking about this is the fundamental of Judaism, in the idea of our hearts and our eyes, which should not lead us astray. So, when we're talking about the idea of this fundamental, of serving God and not serving other idols, it is such a strong and essential root and base in Judaism that it is compared to all the other commandments of the Torah, of everything, of the whole Judaism encapsulated into one. Because if a person is going to say that he agrees to and he believes in a certain idol, essentially he is saying, I don't believe in God. Because if we believe in God, then we believe that there is no other idol. God is one, as we know, and there is nothing besides him. There is no other idol and no other God besides God himself. So therefore, if a person says that he believes in a certain idol, so then essentially he is saying that he does not believe in God. And everything that God represents, all the prophets, Moses, the Torah, you name it, all the way from the beginning of time, from Adam, the creation of the world, all the way till the end of times. But if someone is going to acknowledge God and the Torah, so then essentially he is agreeing to the eternity of God, and he is pushing away all other beliefs, and that is something which is a basic and important foundation and fundamental of all the commandments, all the mitzvot that we do. The base for them is that we believe in God. God told us to do a certain thing, so therefore we do it. So whatever we do, and this is already something which we've learned in the laws of ethics with the Rambam, that whatever we do in our life should all be the common goal to do what God wants us to do. And this basic fundamental is based on our belief in God, so we need to have it. Now, if we have a person who is serving idols, so we have a Jewish person who starts serving idols, very sad, very terrible. So it's a very terrible thing, and this person, although he is Jewish at the end of the day, but we cannot consider him and act with him as another Jew because he is an idol worshiper. Especially someone who does it, he knows God, and someone who knows what the Torah is all about. And then he goes and purposely, just in spite, will go and serve idols. That's again a very, very terrible, terrible sin. And the community shouldn't just accept him back by that person by that person repenting, but rather it's going to be very hard for that person to be able to come back. But at the end of the day, if we see that that person really has regret and really wants to come back to believe in God and be a Jew and live his life as a Jew, then of course we take him in with love. But the idea is that someone who is doing it in spite, someone who is serving God, serving other gods, just in order to spite God himself, is a very, very terrible sin, and this is a person who we should not be in contact with, so to speak. Whoever accepts and agrees that one of these gods are true, essentially is disgracing and blaspheming God's glorious and awesome name. And therefore the Rambam says he includes over here in these laws of idol worship the laws of a blasphemer, because it's the same fundamental of blaspheming God's name, which is essentially the idea of idol worship where we're lacking respect for God. So when we're talking about idol worship or we're talking about blaspheming, they actually both have the same punishment, the same consequence. They're both, the Torah says that they're both the consequence of being stoned. And that is why the Rambam, he says that he included these laws over here. So we're going to go a little bit to a different topic till the end of the chapter. We're going to be talking about a blasphemer. So these are the laws in regards to a blasphemer. Someone who comes along and curses God, God forbid, and using one of God's holy names. So he's taking the four-lettered name of God, either it's Ado and then Nai, or one of the other, the name of Yud, K, and then Vav and K. It's one of those four-letter name of God. And he comes and he says, he curses God's name. That is going to be a blasphemer, and that person will be killed by the Beth Din, by stoning. So what do we see in the Torah? What does it say? It says in the Torah very clearly, do not curse God. So if two witnesses have heard someone cursing God, and they warn them, etc., and they go through the whole process, and then they come to court and they say, we saw and we heard this person cursing God. So the court will start to interrogate them, these witnesses, and they start asking them, what did you hear, what did you see, where was it, what time was it? And they start interrogating these two witnesses to make sure that they are saying the truth. Now, once we have established that what they are saying is true, we actually have to know what they said, what this person said, how did he curse God? But for the witness himself to say it over, he's essentially saying the words of cursing God himself. So what we do is we take everyone out of the room. So we only have the judges and the two witnesses. And we ask the witness, one of the witnesses, to say, what did you hear? And he says that I heard so and so, and he says exactly what he heard. And when he says the curse on God's name, everyone in the room, so himself, his partner, and the judges, they all tear their clothing as a sign of mourning on such a terrible thing to have heard a curse on God's name. And then the other witness doesn't have to say it again, but rather he says, I heard just like him. And if there were many witnesses, same idea. they say, I heard like him. And the moment the person blasphemes and he lets out that statement of curse against God, it's over. It's too late. You can't say, oh, I regret it. If a person curses God, it's a capital sin. And the truth is that not only is this something which is only for a Jewish person, only according to Torah for Jewish people, but the truth is that it's actually one of the 7 Noahide laws. One of the 7 Noahide laws is that we have to respect God and we're not allowed to curse God. That is a very fundamental idea for all of mankind, not just for Jewish people. Everyone has to follow this. Everyone has to give respect to their Creator. And whoever hears someone, God forbid, cursing God, they always have to tear their clothing, and it's a sign of mourning on such a terrible thing. But if you heard it from a non-Jewish person, so then the law will be a little bit different. He doesn't actually have to tear his clothing. But it's, of course, as we said, it's a very terrible thing as well. And before this person, this blasphemer, is killed by the Beth Din, so then the judges put their hands over the person's head and they say, you are responsible for your death. You have brought this upon yourself. And this is something special only by the laws of a blasphemer, that no other offenses have such an idea, but rather over here, the judges place their hands on his head and tell him this, that essentially this person has brought this upon himself by the person saying such a terrible thing, by cursing God, God forbid. They have essentially brought upon themselves their own death. And that is the chapter of Rambam for today, my friends. So I wish you all a very good day, and God willing, tomorrow we will continue with the next chapter in the laws of idol worship. So we're going to be learning all about this over the next couple days. So get involved and got to strengthen our belief in God. That is the essence and that is the core. All the best.